I want to say that this is sponsored by Forestdale Fish Market. Grateful for their sponsorship. And Link. And so our panel, well, Jason Stiting, the director of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe Natural Resources Department, is going to be the moderator. David Green is a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag, Natural Resources Committee. Vernon Buddy Pockneck is the chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe Natural Resources Committee. Chiefy Mills, Earl Mills Jr., Chiefy, is the chief of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. And Alan Maxim is a former member of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe Natural Resources Committee. So take it away, guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So, and thanks for everyone for showing and Link for having us. So, I guess today we're here to discuss a few topics, and many of these topics, some of these are educational, just informative sessions, so that the general public has a better idea of the tribe's Aboriginal rights and what that means for our culture and for the community. Some of the other topics that we'd like to talk about today include water quality and the concerns and the issues that we're having right here within our community. Everyone is, I'm sure, is extremely on or aware of all the issues that we're having. It's pretty obvious. You read about it all the time. And then we will just, I mean, I think it's going to be sort of a free-flowing conversation today. I think it'll be a relaxed kind of panel discussion. And, if there are any questions or anything like that, at any point I can just get up with a microphone and come out and assist you. I would just say, I don't know how we want to go. I guess we'll just kind of figure it out as we go. We'll just do it organically. But, so again, I'm the Natural Resources Director for the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. Everyone at this table is an enrolled member of the tribe as well. I guess I'll just kick things off really quickly. Through our department, we're responsible. Basically, we're acting like stewards of the resources, not only in Mashpee, but of all of Cape Cod and really all of our ancestral homelands. And we work mainly through federal grant dollars to combat most of the issues that are going on here in town. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, is our biggest funder, but we also have probably 6 or 7 different state and federal grants, along with some technical assistance grants through a lot of the universities. So there is a lot of work that's going on. There are a lot of people who are willing to help and trying to help us. And don't forget, these issues that we have in town, these are our cultural lands and have been historically for 12,000 years, but these resources that we're trying to protect are also yours. So if a pond closes, you can't go swimming. There are a lot of things that affect us and it affects our culture and our cultural identity, but these are your natural resources too, don't forget. So, we have a moral obligation and a cultural obligation to protect, of course, these resources, but you folks do as well. It is your moral obligation to help out in any way that you can, and I'd like to make that point clear. So thank you for your time. I guess we'll probably just, any particular topics you want to start out with? Okay. You guys?
Testing left, right. I've been asked to speak today regarding Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights, and in particular the Mashpee's hunting and fishing rights. And where do they come from, and how are they enforced, those types of things. And I thought the best way and the most efficient way is to start by actually reading you what the law is regarding Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights for the Mashpee tribe. And this was a decision that was rendered by the Supreme Court of Massachusetts, upholding an appellate court decision recognizing the Mashpee's rights to hunt and fish. And I put in a synopsis of their actual words, how they describe these rights and how they came to be. Rights to hunt, fish, and gather have been held by the Wampanoag Native American Indian people of this area from time immemorial, and remain an important aspect of Wampanoag life, providing food, service to the community, and an ingredient of cultural identity. These rights have been acknowledged in law since before the founding of the United States. And they've been recognized in treaties, in statutes, and judicial decisions of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It is established United States law that although conservation regulation of fishing is ordinarily within the police power of a state, additional burdens exist which the states must bear in order to regulate. American Indian fishing is among them. Ordinary state fisheries management programs are not ipso facto applicable to Indian fishing. The Commonwealth must demonstrate that applications of the Commonwealth must demonstrate that application of the regulations that they determine to Wampanoag fishing are appropriate and essential for conservation. As specifically have been upheld since, as they said, before there was the United States of America. Prior to the colonies becoming a united country, the Mashpee Wampanoags had not only sent representatives to England, but had also met with the king and his representatives in the way of treaties. One of the most famous of those is the Falmouth Treaty. At that time, the king was reasserting his control over the lands of New England, and in particular in northern places like Maine, which is now Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. He had already dealt in many regards with some of the tribes on the lower portions of New England. But at that time there were conflicts over the rights to hunt and fish and to go where the hunting and fishing had traditionally gone. And it had been reduced to hostages being taken. That there were now people being held by both sides in lieu of those rights being denied. In the signing of that treaty, the king acknowledged the rights for all Indians within his territories in New England to fish and fowl as formerly for the return of those bodies and the return of ours. The premise of that law remained until the formation of the United States of America. And as a result of that, were protected under law by the federal laws, which said that no one can break a treaty except Congress. It was happening in other places. Entire tribes of people were being marched out to new locations, not the least of which is some of the most famous ones, like the Trail of Tears with the Eastern Cherokees being marched to Oklahoma, and 80% of them dying en route in the middle of winter on foot. The Mashpees went on to fight another different war. And it wasn't necessarily the Mashpees, it was the Wampanoag Nation in southeastern Massachusetts, known most famously as King Philip's War. Following King Philip's War, many members of the not just the Mashpee, but all tribes, were placed on Indian districts, Indian plantations. And at that time, many members of the tribe were placed here in what is now any town of Mashpee. Parts of Falmouth, Barnstable, Bourne were also included in that district or that Indian plantation. It was largely the work of someone like Richard Bourne, after whom the town of Bourne was later named, that this land had been set aside, never to be sold out or transferred outside of our tribe. And it was here that the much smaller community lived and survived for generations. When the United States was formed, one of the first treaties ever signed was between the Wampanoag Nation and the Pilgrims. And following that, the rights to hunt and fish were represented in the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a number of years. And then in the early 1940s, the Commonwealth went through what they called cleaning up of the old blue laws. And they took all of the laws in the state books, which acknowledged that they were not pertinent to Native Americans indigenous to the state, off the books. And at that time, we lost our local state protection under the law to hunt and fish as formerly, or so they thought. Because Congress had said the state doesn't have the right to do that, that they can't deal arbitrarily by taking laws on and off the local state books with tribes. Only the federal government can do that. And they had already established a Congress which was charged of that. Later on in the 70s, a representative from the Mashpee tribe, who was then Indian commissioner in Massachusetts, John Peters. John tried to reinstate those laws that had been taken off the books, which said that we were exempt from those laws, which they used to constrain the rest of the greater population. And he filed, along with some state legislatures, a bill to do that. But it met with some resistance among non-native members of the state legislature, and in particular with the law enforcement agencies in the state. And they reduced it to a resolution. But the resolution clearly outlined all of those responsibilities that the state had and all of our historical data. And it was tens of thousands of events that upheld those rights. There was a movement later on in the 80s to try to exterminate those rights. And there were a history of cases here in Barnstable County District Court where they started taking Mashpee men and women to court for fishing or hunting without a license. And in every case, the Mashpees were upheld, with the exception of one. They brought in an external judge, a sitting judge, not from Barnstable District County, but from another location. And he heard the case of Maxim and Green versus the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The two people that were the defendants in that case, one was my brother Michael, and the other one was my cousin David, from left to right. Found themselves at the hands of a judge in Barnstable that said, I don't care what all of the precedent cases are that went before you. Today, I'm finding you guilty. Even though there were 5 cases on the books of Mashpee men who taken down their hunting and fishing and so forth that had been dismissed because they didn't have any bearing on our tribe. They had no jurisdiction over it. And so we had to bear the expense of taking it to the appellate court, and we did. And at an extensive trial at the appellate court level, the appellate court overturned that decision, saying, no, that's not correct. These people have these rights, they've had them, and they're going to continue to have them. But at that time, the local district attorney decided, well, we're going to appeal that, because he was facing a lot of political pressure from various communities. And so he did, and it went to the state Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court eventually upheld that decision, remanded it back. In that history, they list completely all of the various treaties, negotiations, tribal victories that created the history for that, as well as the federal Indian law, which protected our rights under those laws, which no one had really questioned much in the past because we're such a small community. When I was born back in 1951 in Mashpee, there were less than 1,500 registered voters. But we've changed quite a bit since then. And we're sharing the land now with a lot more people. It's easy to bump elbows. The fact is, though, that if you want a clear understanding of the history of our rights, how we acquired them, why we still have them, visiting a website that is run by the attorney that represented us, Peter DeRico, will help you come to a long, clear, linear understanding of where those rights originated and how we've maintained them. I've given copies of the webpage to our sponsors here today so that you can take a look at whether or not you've ever seen those laws before, because they are state law, and make a determination for yourself as to why there's so much confusion about them. But it's like anything else. Unless it's taught, unless it's passed on, knowledge becomes extinct. And that's why we do this, in hopes that people outside of our own tribal community will come to understand what we assert to be our rights, what we've continued to assert to be our rights, and come to understand that we want to protect the resources more than probably anyone in the immediate vicinity. Not just because we share them with other people, but because we survive on them. And some of the things we'll talk about today will describe the things that we need to have to make ourselves whole. I want to point out one other thing. If you want to do some further reading, Peter DeRico, who represented us in that case, and who co-represented us in several of the cases heard down in Mashpee, is also probably one of the most widely recognized experts on Indian law in the United States. Peter's also represented many of the tribes in the western part of the nation in some of the most notorious cases, including the Black Hills, including many of the other federally recognized tribes throughout the nation. Has recently written a new book called Federal Anti-Indian Law, in which he quotes many of the cases that he's represented and the basis by which the Supreme Court and the Congress have rendered decisions based on the history of those infamous cases. I think many are surprised that we still rely on the decisions made by popes hundreds and hundreds of years ago, which granted the right for conquest and enabled the annihilation of entire nations of people for profit in the name of humans, which we were not considered at that time. So this is a wide speaking engagement today. For many of us, it's recognition of the fact that we are human, that we are protected under the law, and probably in a greater way than we ever have been, and that we don't want to do anything other than enjoy the few vestiges of what was our history and our nation while we still have them.
Thanks, Alan. Alan mentioned the case that went to the state Supreme Court, and Dave Green was actually involved with that case. I don't know, it might be able to put things in a little bit more of a personal, human context, if you wouldn't mind maybe filling the folks in as to what went down.
Yeah, so my name's Dave Green. I'm on the Natural Resource Commission for the tribe also, and was part of that case that Alan had talked about, and it was back in the 90s, early 90s, and Michael and myself were shellfishing down at the bay. We each had a little half-peck sized basket, and we were just digging clams for dinner. The town environmental police came down and asked us for our licenses, which they knew we didn't have licenses. They knew that we had tribal IDs, and this was before federal recognition also. So our laws were intact, like Alan had said, since time immemorial, basically. But and the disturbing part of the whole thing was that the commercial fishermen, they were clammers out there jet clamming clams, and there were dead clams all over the beach. They were using hydraulic pumps, and they were taking, I think at that time they were allowed to take 12 bushels of clams a day per person, and we had not even a half a peck of clams each for a meal. and we had, told the environmental officer from the town, which there were other things that led up to it too. I mean, they knew that we were fishing on a tribal ID, and they said the town told us that we're to prosecute you, and we're gonna give you a $75 ticket, and you're gonna pay the ticket, and we're dumping your clams, which they did. And at that time, we didn't pay the fine. We said we're not paying it. We talked to the tribe, and we told them that we were gonna, that we have to fight this. This is, this is against our Aboriginal rights, which of course the tribe was 100% behind. So in the beginning, we went to district court. We had all our paperwork, and it was just, I call him Mike Chuggy, that's what we all know him as, but Chuggy had all the pictures of all the dead clams on the beach, the jet pumps out there pumping, and, the amount of clams that we had, and they didn't want to look at any of that. They said, not today, not in this court, you guys are guilty. So then it went to a criminal charge because we didn't pay the fine. So then we went up to we had to have another hearing on a criminal charge months later, and we were found guilty at that hearing also. So at that point it got appealed up to the Superior Court. This is on a $75 fine. So now we're in Superior Court, and they found us guilty at that level also. And then Peter Dorico got involved, which he had represented many, tribes and many tribe members from Mashpee on other cases, and and then that whole journey of going to appellate court, and then going to the Superior Court and then appellate court, which we were found not guilty, and it was overturned, and there was a lot of law and statute that was put on the books, and we had a lot of representation from the tribe and from people outside of the tribe also that attended these hearings and these court cases. And our chief, Buddy's father at the time, Vernon, was a big part of that. He was testified. There was a lot of people that testified in these cases, and then it was overturned, and then it was on record. There was precedent, so that in my opinion, it helped us. I'm on the Natural Resource Commission. I've been for the last over 12 years, and we've had discussions with Division of Marine Fisheries, with the environmental police, and it's been more cooperative. We still have issues that we deal with, but it's much more recognized at this point, and the state, to a certain extent, is more willing to sit down and talk with us when issues come up, and that's the way that it's supposed to be. If there's an issue with it, that pertains to the tribe, there's supposed to be consultation and discussion, that and that we can hopefully collaboratively come to the best answer of the issue. And but that's kind of the story of the Maxim Green case. I was also involved with another case, the Mattapoisett case, where another incident happened, and that was, I was getting cohogs, and the same thing, I had a small amount of cohogs, and that got litigated and was settled in court, and the town of Mattapoisett, fully recognize our Aboriginal rights now, which is a good thing. That's good. There's been times where different environmental police officers or town officers haven't been educated, and so that's what the courts have pushed for, is more education on the enforcement side to understand what our rights and what the laws are that protect us. So we've been making headway with that, in my opinion. So that's just a quick update, anyways, from my perspective.
Thanks, Dave. Dave's right. We've had the state come to Mashpee, and they've actually come into our building to sit with us. And you're right. We're making progress, but there's still quite a ways to go. And some of the things that they're hesitant on. They come in and they say, yeah, we understand, we hear you, we know what your rights are. But then when we say, well, then maybe what you should do next is put it into your abstract. Which is their yearly magazine, which has all the hunting and fishing requirements, and it goes out every year. And you know, put those rights right on the front page, so that anyone who isn't aware of them that opens it up and can reference it and say, oh yeah, there it is right there in black and white. They won't do that. And one other thing that I will mention is one of the real hang-ups that we're having with the state is on the definition of the word sustenance. And that's I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole and talk on that quite a bit, but if you're a fisherman in this community, especially a guy from the commercial side, but anyone, even a guy going out recreationally, the definition of sustenance to a native could be to go out and get clams because you need money for a book for your your daughter or your son for college, or your son needs a new pair of sneakers, your son or daughter just enrolled in soccer, and you need money to fund that. That's what sustenance is. There should be no state mandated definition on what that word is, and yet they insist on giving us a definition that they think it means, and that's been a real big hang up with them.
And that definition is also that definition was brought up in the trial also and was explained by Peter DeRico on the record, which made it clear that sustenance is to sustain yourself, whether it's to feed yourself or to sustain yourself, as Jason was talking about.
And also, to be pointed out that many of Mashpee's earliest residents, when after European contact was made, were as whalers. There wasn't a whaling boat that went around Cape Cod or off these waters that didn't have usually a Mashpee Wampanoag or someone from the islands out there on that boat with them. But not just for navigation, but because of wild superstition as well. But the fact of the matter is that our Mashpee Indian Museum had a extraordinary roadmap back in history to the names of people from Mashpee alone that were members of the whaling community, that our hunting and fishing rights extended well beyond going down to get a few clams or a few quahogs or picking up some scallops. It extends to gathering of different types of medicinal plants that we use. It pertains to a harvest that may or may not coincide with what the state has for harvest limitations. When David talked about those fish that day, the town of Bourne was claiming that the fish had to have these regulations in order to protect them from overfishing and to preserve them for conservation. The Supreme Court kind of shook their head and said, you're allowing hundreds of bushels to be taken across the bay in the same body of water at the same time that you are arresting two men for taking less than 60 clams. In what way is your law designed to protect those fish? And what have you done to work with the people that need to protect it? And that is the largest society. And they suddenly had to face, the state in particular had to face their own definition problems, which were the words that they had traditionally used in the past to describe why they had these laws and why they had to have them were things other than control and ability to maintain control and keeping it within their official I don't know, command in the jurisdiction, yeah. And I think that what we found over time was that was the toughest thing. Is they feel like, well, we have a certain amount of authority over you people. And the Supreme Court said, not regarding this, that regarding these laws, these people gave you the right to hunt and fish here, not the other way around. That they invited you into the water to share these resources. And at one time there were so many, for example, codfish here, that they named this entire bridge of this peninsula sticking out in the ocean, Cape Cod. They believed them to be inexhaustible. People from all over the world came here to fish those fish. They thought that that would never end. And now they have to be so heavily regulated that it's almost to the point of absurdity that they've wasted that resource. But I can tell you this, I challenge anyone here, I challenge anywhere, to show me the article or the accusation or the indictment of the Mashpee Wampanoag Indian tribe or its people in the extermination, extinguishment, in the pollution, in the contamination of any of these resources. They thrived under our guardianship for more than 15,000 years. There were so many they were believed to be unexhaustible when those people from outside of our belief system arrived. And now we have to face the fact that if we don't appreciate them together, if we don't share these together, then they will be extinguished.
Before we move on from Aboriginal rights, is there anyone that has any specific questions for anyone on the panel? No? Okay. While we talk about Aboriginal rights and being on the water and fishing, oh, there is one.
My understanding of the depletion of the fish had to do with, charitably to say, the lax attitude of people in Massachusetts and along the eastern seaboard of protecting the line that they made in the water of fishing rights, and that they allowed not only people to go over that border of fishing rights and like take things, but that the Provincetown fishing families in their little wooden boats were trying to compete with these trawlers that not only could take massive amounts of fish, but to process them and to freeze them on board. And the families with, a little boat, a couple of sons, a father, they were trying to compete, and in many cases that those wooden boats, family-owned boats, sank by the weight to try to get the too many fish there. So it wasn't as simple. It was really people, the mentality was that there was enough, and so we didn't have to worry about the border. So there's a kind of distinction, I think, if I'm not wrong.
And in my lifetime, the border used to be 3 miles out. And they changed it to 200 miles out. But even still today, those resources are being depleted because of overfishing of them. Bycatch is one of the worst mutilations of fish that you will ever see in your life. If they're out there fishing for scallops and they're going through schools of juvenile codfish or haddock or whatever it happens to be while they're dragging that bottom clean for scallops, they can't take that fish in. They have to throw that fish back. And you know that there are schools of herring gulls and seabirds behind each one of those trawlers. They're not just following them because they think they've got a good GPS system. It's because of the bycatch. The same is happening to herring. The river herring are being brutalized out there because of bycatch. And it's not true of just of the herring. It's true of almost every resource we have. Eels, every eel in Massachusetts, every eel on the East Coast goes down to the Sargasso Sea, which is basically a big ball of seaweed that floats off the Carolina coast out there. It's a huge area to spawn. And then they come back here and they have their live young. And our rivers used to be loaded with what we called eelgrass. And the elvers would live in that eelgrass as protection. And the market right now is so great for those live elvers, particularly in the Asian community right now, that they will pay literally thousands of dollars a pound for these fish to be shipped back there live. So almost every resource has its own story like that. I can go through them all for you, but the truth is that it's still a matter of there are just too many people taking too much, and in particular on the spawning grounds. That those areas out there will always be the spawning grounds. The question is, will there be enough to keep it viable? And now with global warming and water temperature changes, it's become that much more complicated because the spawning grounds are shifting. Yes. A lot of people down in Chatham do, but we have some local seals here, but nothing like the population that's accrued down there. And you know, the truth of the matter is that as that population increases, there was a time when there was harvesting of the seals, especially by lobster fishermen and so forth, and there was actually a bounty on them. But that's been stopped. There's no longer a bounty on them, and in particular because a lot of the area down there is along the area that's known as National Seashore and stuff, and they're trying to let these populations regrow. They bring white sharks closer to us, you know, and it's a matter of we may have to adjust our way of living because of other species as well. But the truth of the matter is that the seal population can become overwhelming. California knows that probably even better than we do right now. In places where we're thought to be nice places to have marinas and stuff like that are winding up with huge populations just flopping up on the decks and doing damage and stuff like that. So, oh, they were, yeah, and they still are. Many tribes' diets, yeah, but not here like they are as much in the northern climates. A lot of our friends, especially on the far north, harvest them, use the skins. Yeah, use the skins, and there's still a commercial market for them up there. You know, again, things shift.
Yeah, marine mammals were traditionally a part of our diet. People say whales beach up because there's problems in the environment, but whales have always beached up for thousands of years. And whenever a whale beached, it became community property, and every family in the community was entitled to their portion of that meat. And until our people stopped eating whale just before the beginning of the 20th century, over at Aquina, they continued to apportion beached whales to each family. Seal, it's very good meat, and prior to the extermination of seals here, it was a traditional part of our diet. And the skins make beautiful rain gear, fall weather gear. But that all changed. Our culture has changed because of how changes took place in the environment. And you know, the massacre of the seals, people were saying seals were eating all the fish. The seals were eating fish long before we were, and they were never the problem. But I refer to them as the two-legged. You know, they think everything is theirs. They forget that we're all related, that everybody has always been dependent on these resources, not just us. And so that's where the Marine Mammal Protection Act came in, because people were decimating everything that competed with them for these resources.
So today,
So most there you go. Yeah, so most tribal member families rely on much as they can get. Some tribal people eat more tribal traditional foods than others. I particularly try to eat 80% of tribal different foods, different seasons. Like in the summertime, during the summer and the spring and everything, it's fishing season. Now, fishing seasons, we have maybe a couple more weeks of fishing season to get our stuff for the winter and freeze it and smoke it and everything. And now we go on to another season of hunting. And hunting is the next season that we go through our cycle of all traditional foods. It's very important for all tribal people to keep their traditional foods as far as health reasons. That stuff that you actually get in the store for tribal people is actually bad for us. So I try to stay as much as organic as I can. It's most like the vegetables in the store. I'm sure if everybody never had an organic vegetable, if they wouldn't change today, they probably wouldn't buy another product that wasn't organic. That much difference. So it's very important for all of us to keep our traditional foods going. I try to encourage that far as the younger people, a lot of our people have gotten off of that diet, going in that program of following the flow, the American flow, I call it. And this is why we're trying to bring this back of awareness to our younger people also, that our culture is important and our traditional food is more important.
Yeah, these foods not only play a part in, you are what you eat, but there's the other cultural component of our relationship with these other animals. That's the traditional cultural understanding, that the role that they play, the lessons that historically they have played in our lives of understanding the world around us. In our traditional stories, it's explained how we've learned different aspects of our culture about our relationship with the earth by watching other animals. They all had something to teach us. And when we consume these things, it's the same as when a hawk is consuming a bird or a fish. All these aspects of our relationships, our dependency upon each other. I mean, when we kill an animal, it's not because we like killing. It's any more than when a hawk kills a rabbit. It's not because he likes killing rabbits. It's a part of his way of life. And that's what some people have a hard time understanding. They see us out hunting ducks, and I've heard stories where people will stop and say, "Why don't you just go to Stop and Shop and get a duck?" And they fail to understand the whole aspect of that understanding of that other relative of ours, that winged relative, in their relationship with our environment and our culture and in our use of that animal and our spiritual connection to that thing.
This has been very interesting and a lot of new information here today. Thank you for being here and opening up some windows for us to understand. What I understand guidelines as far as fishing goes. What are the guidelines that the tribe has as far as hunting goes?
We have, it's going to sound strange to some people, but we're of a culture that believes the least governed is the best governed. And the books in the Massachusetts State House would be in a line from here to Route 130 for the laws. It would take a lifetime to learn all of those laws. And the truth of the matter is, we try to teach those laws as part of our cultural growth and education. We try to teach our children when to harvest, when not to harvest. We do have a couple of hard and fast ones. When it gets to the point, for example, when a species is threatened, and I'll use the example of the elders. The state approached us and said, listen, we face a real threat to the eel population here in Massachusetts. There's been some illegal taking of these elvers. They've been being vacuumed out of the rivers by these trucks that come down from Maine and Canada and other places. And they're coming down at particular times of year when all these elvers are in the eelgrass and they're sucking them out for profit. And would like your support in doing something to restrict the taking of those. And so our tribe passed a resolution that said no taking of the elvers at this time. And we enforce that with our own tribal courts and our own tribal people. We have laws to prohibit the taking of shellfish from areas, in the resolutions usually, from contaminated areas that have been recognized by the state as containing contaminated resources that they don't want to get on the public market and make people injured or hurt. So we have tribal laws that affect those as well. And again, our tribal court deals with those. But the truth of the matter is that there's very little that our tribe does that has absolutely any impact, and insignificant impact, on the greater harvesting and taking of any kind of resource in the state of Massachusetts, or even on Cape Cod. Initially we used to hear the old scare tactic. Well, suppose every member of the tribe decides to come down to this beach and take clams one Sunday. And I said, has that ever happened that you're aware of? And I said, because honestly, I'm hard pressed to find one or two guys to drive down the bay with me sometimes to get some clams, but I've never known a time when they've come in to wipe out a species somewhere. But that's what they used to scare people with. You know, what if those people came here and did this? And it's not just the tribe that they apply that to. Those same kind of reasonings go to beyond the tribe. So for us, it's a matter of looking at all of our resources and managing them as well as we can, knowing that the impact that we make is not even measurable statistically. We don't even exist statistically on the state's data.
I'd like to also just add one other thing, and Alan kind of triggered that for me. We, a lot of the towns now where we've made a resolution that we won't fish contaminated waters, the towns will close areas and they call them seasonal closures. And the reason why a lot of towns are doing this is so that they can sell out-of-state permits to out-of-state people in the summertime and make more money. But that, we don't restrict our tribal citizens from fishing those closed areas, only if it's a contaminated area, because these are towns trying to generate money, and a lot of times they've come to us and said, oh, this is a closed area, but it's not closed because of contamination, so we still have the right, as a tribe member to fish those areas. So I just wanted to bring that up also.
Yeah, and I'll bring a little bit more kind of awareness for that. So when area is open to the state turns around and opens up an area, and the area is open to the whole bay is open. So now the town comes in and says, well, we're going to close this road over here, this particular spot, and we're going to close this and we're going to open this. So that when they close that, they really need to come to the tribe and sit down and talk to the tribe, say, hey, listen, we want to close this area from this date to this date. Do you think that's feasible to you? But instead we have no feedback from these towns. They just want to close them, and then when our fishermen go and fish them, because the state has opened up that whole bay, it causes conflict, and then they're saying that we're taking all the fish. But what we're looking for is for the towns to come in and recognize that we have our Aboriginal rights, and we need them to come down and sit down and discuss this at a manner which they don't want to do. We try to call certain towns to let them sit down and try to talk with us. We never get any calls back. So that's really hard, and that's why we kind of got this panel together to get awareness of some of these things that goes on in the town, to make them understand that, we're here to make this a better spot for all of us, and they need to listen to the tribal people because we're an important part of this solution here.
How do you see those of us who appreciate what you're facing and appreciate your history? How can we support your efforts, particularly in the towns, in getting and encouraging the dialogue that you desire?
My appreciation of what's going on and why we're doing this is the education part. We appreciate everybody from every other culture that comes to here. As you've seen since the Pilgrims land, our people have always welcomed other peoples and other cultures and try to make them understand. We go off the road here and there, but we try to pick up as much as people that we can, and we'll listen. It's not, we don't get a whole lot of awareness of this, but we're trying to change some of this stuff that's happening, because this is all new to a lot of stuff. Because, as me being born in the 60s, they were still hanging people in the 60s, which is not that far away. You know what I mean? So we got a long ways to go to make a lot of other people understand what's going on in the community, what's going on in the water, and what's going on with indigenous people in this country.
Just as a point, I wanted to touch on one of the previous questions. It was asked what percentage of tribal members hunt today, and I think we have to recognize that the lifestyles we live today are not the same as the lifestyles we used to live. We all have to pay rent, we all have to pay mortgages and things, so that dictates your time at work and things like that, and a lot of us would much rather be out hunting and fishing than working a 9 to 5 and the other responsibilities you sign up for. So, I think there are members of the community that I know, members of this panel, some of what they catch, they take around to their elders to make sure that those people are fed, the ones that can't get out there for themselves. And there's a communal responsibility to do that. When you take something, you give a portion of what you take away. That's cultural teachings that we all share. So I just wanted to bring that point. The other thing I was wondering on an earlier statement when we came in, does the panel see any value in designating the Nantucket Shelf region as a marine protected area? Tribes are able to do that, and do you see, I guess the reason for asking that is because there isn't parity in our way of life and our traditional ecological knowledge, the way that it's applied to the regulatory process that the state dictates. Would you see value in designating the entire Nantucket Shelf region as a marine protected area so that we do have more involvement based on our cultural relationship with that space?
Yeah, I most definitely would like to see that happen for all of us. For the simple reason is these big draggers are coming inside the lines, and as we know, here in New England, this is the place that all the fish come and spawn. And these big trawlers and everything are wrecking the bottoms. They're tearing up the whole bottoms, all the spawn and stuff that is spawned. They're stirring it up. We have less fish. Flounder, some of you, if you've been on Cape Cod a long time, everybody went flounder fishing and went to every bay or every bridge, and you could just get a few clams and catch a bucket of flounder in, a tide. 3 hours, 2 hours, you could catch flounder. You can't catch flounder or fluke these days at all. You haven't been able to catch a bucket of flounder in 40 years here in any of these bays. And this would help by making this a sanctuary of having these fish be able to spawn and be able to survive and come back in the bays, because that's really important to our bays and our ponds, the survival of the fishes in the water. I see totally lots of times how the bay has died of different species coming out. The eelgrass is number one species that needs to come back to our bays. They supply a lot of the oxygen in the water, and with the oxygen comes all the other life inside of there, like the eels survive in there. You have the scallops that survive in there. You have the baby fishes survive in there. You have lots of marine life inside of eelgrass that when that eelgrass is gone, it kills the bay. So that's kind of our lifeline. We have to look at some of those things, which has happened in here. We have overpopulated bays with boats and moorings in there, docks everywhere. Houses, it's supposed to be 100 feet away from the shoreline, which their grass is greener than green, 10 feet away from the base. Where is all this stuff going? We know where it's going. It's killing our bays. It's killing our ponds. So I would love to see Cape Cod in the islands turn around and make this a sanctuary. It would be unbelievable. Even if they could do it for 2 years and then open it a year and then close it again, to get some of this life back into our areas that need to be.
Is the tribe working at all with the scientific community in Woods Hole, since that seems to be a base of a lot of marine research and concern about fisheries, etc.?
Yes. Not only are we working with them with our resource people, but they are involved with our youth, so that we have what we call a summer science camp, and we're trying to encourage some of our youth to go into the sciences so that they can carry credentials, so that when they stand up in a meeting and speak, they have legitimacy. You know, when we speak on our environmental and ecological knowledge, it's not fully respected, even though we're speaking based on generations of understanding. But when you have a PhD behind your name, now your words mean something. So we've been working with the Oceanographic Institute, Marine Biological Laboratories, NOAA, and they work with our young people, sharing with them the kinds of life that they could live, you know, being involved every day with our resources. But we also work with them. One of the biggest problems that you keep hearing is the eelgrass, and it's a problem that they've been working on for the last 50 years at here in Woods Hole at the University of Rhode Island. There are many institutions that are working on these problems, but the solution is not simple. If it was, then we wouldn't be here today. We would all be on the bay scalloping. Because today, October 1st, when we grew up, it was like a holiday. Kids wouldn't be in school. People would be calling in sick, and if you weren't fishing, then you were shucking. And the local economy and the local cuisine was all about scallops. Today, you're hard-pressed to find a scallop shell on the beach, let alone to go out and have scallop. My kids, you know, they would always say, "Oh, I can't sleep." Why? Because I'm hungry. They'd get up and they'd want some sautéed scallops for a snack, and which is a beautiful way to live. But that's why people came to Cape Cod originally, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. That was because that could be part of their life every day. It's no longer a part of our lives every day. But we are seeking solutions, and hand in hand with these scientists. The solutions are not simple, but some of the solutions are. It's like shut down the big fleets. Oh, we can't afford to do that. You know, it's like the foresters that want to cut down the trees. Well, that's how we make a living. Yes, but, you know, and we never get past that.
It should be pointed out too that here in Mashpee, I think this community has really been at the forefront of trying to do the things at the base level of recognizing the ecosystemic connection between water that flows out of our ground through our streams and rivers. And for years now, for generations, we've been doing things like the Mashpee River Quality Process and the Quashnet River Protection Systems, and working with Weavener on Wacoit Bay, and trying to set up the kinds of overall protections. And I think per square inch, Mashpee has probably led the way for many other towns, right down to things like land trusts now, to try to keep land from the threat of additional nitrate intrusion and the kinds of things that we know affect the lens of fresh water that we're all living on top of. So we do a lot here in Mashpee, have done a lot over the years. And I can tell you that we're still facing the problems at a level that is even greater than what we were afraid of even 50 years ago when we were doing some of these things. And we work with almost all of the major environmental agencies on Cape Cod. I can remember back in the 70s when we asked all of our neighboring towns and states and conservation commissions to work with us on the state taking of South Cape Beach, because 75% of that land belonged to one large development corporation, which had planned another golf course, 700 condominiums, and would have restricted access just to the membership of their community. But we were able to use all of the conservation agencies on Cape Cod to help endorse that movement and to move the state to appropriate the money to take that land. It's now protected, and you and I and anybody sitting here, regardless of where you live in Massachusetts, can go down and still enjoy the natural beauty of that place. So we're trying to do a lot here, and especially in this community.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump on that too. I'll add to that. And Dave Whedon is our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, so he works over in the building with me as well, and Dave can attest to this. We're not lacking for the amount of people who want to help us, from the federal agency down to the state agency. We work fantastically right across the street with the town's Natural Resources Department, and then there are ton of universities that we work with. The biggest problem really is capacity. You turn down way more opportunities than you actually see through. And that's, I don't mean it to sound negative in a way, because there are a lot of things that we are doing right now, very actively working on, but there are only so many things that you can do. And there's a lot of opportunity that we just can't follow up on. As you know, we just don't have the staff, we don't have the time. But that being said, there are a lot of good things, and what I would like to kind of touch on what these guys were just mentioning, and Chief Mills mentioned it. What's good and what we strive to do is when we do work with these agencies, we make it known that if we do enter into an agreement or we get funding or we're a co-applicant on an application, we're very cognizant of incorporating tribal ecological knowledge into any grant funding that we get. And everyone's really receptive to that. There is Western science, but then there's also tribal ecological knowledge, and that goes a long way. These federal agencies, and they'll admit it, you know, their background is in the sciences, the Western sciences, and they've all got degrees, but they can come down here and spend a day with Buddy on the Water or Chiefy in the Woods or any of these guys, and they'll learn more about this particular region than they could have ever learned in a book. And that's the absolute fact. You don't know the community until you get down in there and you start talking to the folks who are on the water every day, who are in the woods every day, who can give you all the anecdotal information from when they were a kid, what things used to look like, to what they look like now. You've heard the stories. That's important information. And these agencies do understand that. And we make sure that they understand that. And we don't move forward without some form of reciprocal relationship like that. That's very important to all of us. And I know Dave can attest to that as well.
I'm just horrified, first off, that like the environmental people come to you and say, well, maybe you guys need to nip this in the bud a little bit, when you're not the problem in the first place. And I guess one of the questions I had is, what do you feel it would take for, first of all, has anyone come to you and said, we need your help to try to straighten the mess out here, like in a lot of ways? I can remember being a kid and being able to walk down to the dock and catch a flounder in the front yard, and I've never seen a flounder again, really. So I hadn't even remembered that. But I'm just wondering, does anybody actually come to you and say, you know, is there a panel that could sit down with us on a lot of different levels and say, you know, what can you do to help us turn things around? Because I do think, you know, you've got a lot of answers for those things.
Yeah, well, you know, which comes real wicked hard is, you know, the lack of knowledge that people have of what's actually being taken out of the ocean. A lot of people don't know that 90% of the catch in the water is being taken out of the water. They only see the statistics, what the state wants you to show. For instance, you know, you have the lobster industry. You know, you have literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds per year that they're allowed to take. You know what I mean? Then we have the problems with the whales in there where the lobster traps are. We're losing our whales because we're overfishing lobsters. And it's vice versa for every species that comes into the water. So the biggest part, I believe, is this awareness of getting it to the state and making them understand that other people care about what's in our waters and how our bays are falling apart of this overfishing. So awareness for me and letting you people know and letting everybody know what they need to do is get to us and just maybe write a letter to them and say, listen, our bays and our oceans are falling apart because the lack of, you want the money. It's all always about the money with the states. They don't want to take away a part of their, I say, bonus because they get a raise every 2 years and they're not worried about what's in the ocean. They're worried about their retirement.
There's one other thing, we've had the Division of Marine Fisheries where we've gone into Boston and we've sat down and talked with them because they were trying to control us from, saying that they didn't agree we had the right to commercial fish, which we know as a tribe we do have the right. And so we were in discussions with Peter DeRico and with the Division of Marine Fisheries, and they came to us and they said, well, we'll give you 10 commercial licenses. They still wanted to control us. That's what it was. We'll give you 10 licenses. That's not going to do it for the tribe. And we're not talking about commercial fishermen that go out and, that are going to over-harvest. I mean, we don't even have that many commercial fishermen. And to separate it commercial to sustenance, they just couldn't grasp and didn't want to grasp. So that's kind of what we run into roadblocks. I mean, they're willing to work with us, like Jason had said, to a certain point, but it's all about the control. And same thing with the environmental police. We've had some good discussions with them, but then it's always, they say we have it in black and white what people can do, and your Aboriginal rights to us are not in black and white, so we need you to put it on paper so that we can regulate your people, basically. And that doesn't work for us. We have our own tribe. We answer to our tribe. We have a natural resource department, and there's things in place, for our tribe to self-govern, which we have the right to do, self-govern. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention.
And the other truth is that the leadership at the level beyond the tribe changes, and it changes radically when it does change. That a gubernatorial position can be held by people of almost any persuasion, and they generally bring their own new people in. So it's constant re-education on our part to bring them up to speed on this. This is the relationship that we have held for years. Usually the leadership in our tribe changes in a lifetime, and we learn to know and trust each other. And again, it's never about the money for us, because we're not dealing with the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that are impacted by the shell fishing and fin fishing and harvesting services. So we don't have that kind of pull either. And the truth is, you all know that money determines what goes on in Washington, D.C. and in the State House. And anybody thinks that's not the case hasn't spent any time there. But the truth of the matter for us is that we depend on reason, we depend on support from our community. And I want to make this clear. We exist today as a tribe, and we exist in this place, not just because we are strong people. That we exist because people who are not from our tribe, and people who are not from our, necessarily our way of thinking culturally, but identify with our way of thinking, stood by us and stand by us. So we don't kid ourselves into thinking that we're some big, strong political influence. We know we're not. And we still depend on other people's reason and other people's support and friendship to help us be effective.
Hi. First, I want to thank you all. I've been listening carefully and trying to understand it and kind of see it from see on that larger scale. And for me, what it comes down to in terms of education is this word sustenance. I mean, it's the tribe is dealing from a sustenance standpoint, and the rest are dealing from a commerce standpoint. And so when they're looking at the tribe, it seems to me that they think you must be doing commerce too, right? That's where the fear is, right? The fear is that you're going to take on this attitude of commerce, which is what their world is. But in actuality, it's like this education around what sustenance is and letting us know more about those stories, right? How really do you see the land and the resources and that sort of thing? So I just wanted to thank you. That's a nice insight that I've had.
Back in the day, Well, I'm not sure there is one now. There's no fish market on Cape in Mashpee. Never was a fish market. I mean, the supermarket came in our lifetime. When we wanted fish and chips, we went out and caught fish, and often went in the pantry and got the potatoes that we grew in the previous year. I remember back in the 50s, concern was raised about the water quality in a Shumet pond. The fishermen noticed. When I say fishermen, we always fished as families. If we had a little rowboat, and the whole family be in that boat catching fish for dinner that night and into the future. But our fishermen noticed the quality of the meat was changing, and raised concerns to the state, and they didn't see it as a problem. Well, we now understand that the early stages of the plumes were coming out of the base and were affecting that, but they couldn't see it because they didn't have the relationship. See, when we went fishing, we didn't bring one of these with us. We went to the edge of the pond where the springs are, and that's the water we drank. As when we were kids, that's what we drank. And so that starts changing. That doesn't taste right. We have that relationship. So, but they don't listen. Today they don't listen. It's our understanding. We care because we bring our children there, and obviously you want the best for your kids. We want them to be able to know where those springs are and to drink from them, because there's a spiritual understanding and connection to those places. There's a historical story that goes with these things. But we don't want them to drink contaminated water. But we want them to be able to drink out of those springs. So it's our responsibility to see that that water is brought back to the way it used to be. There is an economic value to it, because we could spend our day feeding our family right here, or we could go someplace else and not be with our families to make a living. And so now that quality time that we had with our kids in our place, in our homelands, is lost. And so then we see our culture. We were talking about that earlier. We talk about places, and there's stories and there's local names for different parts of town that go back. Sometimes we don't even understand why it's called Linus's or some place, but these are the places where we have always gone, that there is cultural understanding at these places, not just to go trap a raccoon, but because at that place too there's plants that grow that we can keep an eye on when it is time to harvest, or how that crop, if you will, of plants that we might use for food or for medicine or for material culture like baskets or mats or what have you. It's the whole interaction of that, and so when we see these changes, it affects us right to our bones. Not only because that's what made our bones strong by consuming these plants or animals there, but it's about that whole continuation of the fabric of who we are. But it'd be nice if we had a bigger voice. Our voice has been being heard since the people came on the boats. But and we're still talking.
So a lot of this discussion that we've been having kind of falls under what I would call that the food sovereignty heading, and as it was just touched on, we've been talking a lot about the history of the tribe, and how we spend time for centuries and thousands of years on the water for sustenance. These guys are commercial guys and recreational guys. They fish for sustenance. They fish for dinner. Our chief is a gatherer, and your father, our grandparents were all the same. They were in the woods, they were on the water, and we've been doing this, again, since time immemorial. It's in our blood, it's in our culture. You go to the woods, you harvest, you gather. You go to the water, you fish, you bring home. You feed your families, you feed your community. You gather berries, plants, herbs, whatever, for medicinal purposes to consume. We've been doing it forever. We used to have gardens. I don't know what this area looked like 200 years ago. There were probably gardens
I don't either.
all across.
I don't go back down.
Yeah, right, but you know what I mean? I mean, that's what we did, right? We planted. And I'm sure a lot of these areas were at some point gardens,
You could see all the way down street because it was all open.
Yeah,
all the way down 130.
forest, it was one time, yeah.
So, you know, you look at things today, and everyone up here on this panel is telling you the issues that they're having on the water. There's less fish. The water is contaminated. There's no place really where you're going to put a garden. The only place you're going to be able to grow a garden is on your private property. Lord knows how big that is. If you're lucky, you got an acre, and you're gardening that, you know, a few months out of the year. So we're not able to really flex that sovereign muscle of ours anymore because we just don't have the means anymore. You know, whether it's there's no fish left, whether there's water quality issues, whether we can't get to the water because we're having issues with access. We don't own the land that we once used to, so we can't plant. And you know that affects folks in different ways, but it affects a lot of people, and it's hurtful. It really is hurtful because you do lose part of your cultural identity when you can't do these things like you're used to. And it wasn't that long ago. I'm 54 years old. I remember what Mashpee looked like in the 70s. There was nothing here. The powwows used to be right here. And you used to be able to walk up across the street there to 12 acres, and there would be someone up there drumming or camping or what have you. It was just a whole different time, and that's only 50 years ago, and I cannot believe the changes that have happened. So in saying that, I'd like to maybe hear some anecdotal tales or something along that line from you folks, from what things used to be like. You know, what did it used to be like? What could you go in the woods and get back in the day, Chiefy, that you can't anymore? And we talked a little bit about the fish nowadays that you can't, that just aren't there. And I don't know if that's something that you guys want to elaborate on a little bit.
Yeah, well, we can go back to the eels, as Alan was saying. Our eels is our winter food. It wasn't a hard decision to make a law, as we wouldn't take elver eels because we never took elver eels. Our eels is our winter food, our winter protein. That was something very easy to do, even though that it's thousands of dollars per pound. It's, you know, it goes up to $3,500 a pound for alva eels, and we still today do not have any tribal member that takes alva eels, and we didn't have to make that. We didn't have to make that that law. That was something that every tribal person feels very confident in, and I don't have to tell those people that would do something like that not to take, because they know how important that resource is to us. We can't never probably get that resource back to us. That's one of our number one sustained foods in the wintertime, is those alva eels growing up to adults and feeding us. It's really hard to look at, and it's really hard to gripe that every time that I go fishing, or I go to our elder's house and give them some fish or some flounder or some any type of fish I want to bring to them. They go, "When you bringing me the eels?" You know, so you know everybody misses those things. So that, you know, with awareness, I hope we could just make people aware of, you know, that is like one of our number one sustainable foods that we really miss during the winter. And there's lots of different foods that we really need to look at.
Those eels were also a source of income. When I was young, well, he's a little bit older than me. You could go to any one of these little general stores that always had a deli counter, and in the winter they would sell eels, either in the slime, which meant whole, or out of the slime, which meant they were skinned. And every Cape Codder looked forward to that time of year, not just the natives. And it was a big economic resource, but it was a seasonal food for people. You know, pan-fried eels or eel stifle or pickled eels or smoked eels. Everybody ate eel. And today people eating a eel. Well, any self-respecting Cape Codder, you know, today people eat these little pills that have fish oil in them. Well, in the day you're eating that was your diet. And they tell you the best way to be healthy is in your diet, not with a bunch of little plastic covered things. And everybody ate eel, and it was a resource, you know. In the wintertime, when the eels lay in the mud and they purify themselves, and the meat becomes sweet and succulent, and that's when the eel was harvested. And that's when everybody consumed eels in the restaurants and in the little markets. Eel was something. And then suddenly, it wasn't. You know, suddenly our impact, which kind of crept in, the tipping point came, and the eels couldn't survive because of the quality of their environment. I mean, it's like the rabbit. We used to skip school to go rabbit hunting, and rabbit pie and rabbit stew and fried rabbit was winter meal. You know, weekly, part of our people out there going, it's what we lived on. That's Cape Cod. Well, that New England cottontail is an endangered animal now. Not because of anything that the rabbit did, but of what we did to its environment. The environment has been hurt. So now the new rabbit is here, the eastern cottontail. And that eastern cottontail loves our gardens. The New England cottontail did not go in our gardens. So now we have to fence our tender crops from the bunnies. And we've created this problem, you know, and we had talked about that. You know, oh, what do you don't want progress. Well, at what cost? Is it progress? Or is it just destruction of environment? You know, you can't fight City Hall. Well, you are City Hall. You know, it's your decisions that make the policy. And, you know, we're just a few people in this, you know, back in the day when our relatives controlled, well, the town hall was over here. Their policy was to ensure that these things continued because they were important. Well, they're not so important today to most people, so the decisions they make are not for these things. They don't care about the rabbit, you know. They don't care about the eel. They don't care about protecting the environment that allowed these animals to continue on so that we could have that. I mean, people came here originally in the 50s so they could go down and dig a bucket of clams whenever they wanted. And those same people today now have to spend, I don't know what clams cost. I wouldn't buy a clam, but but you know, so the reasons that people came to Cape Cod are no longer here. You know, now it's I guess because you like golfing. And we have more golf courses, you know, per capita than any place else. But you know, it's together we shape the future of our communities. You know. We're willing to do our part, but it takes everybody. You know, it takes a community to make a community.
Well, I like golfing. But I also love dealing, too. When I was a kid, my father and I would go out, and when we harvested eels, you harvest with a long 15 to 18 foot long pole and an eel spear on it. If anybody wants to sit and know what an eel spear looks like, come see me in my truck after the thing, and I'll show you. I've got a couple heads in the back of my truck right now that I got to put on some poles. But we'd go out in an 18-foot wooden flat bottom boat and would spear eels. And that was a really good way to harvest, because you could catch a good mess of eels, but you weren't wrecking a whole society of fish. And you got what you put your labor in for. Sometimes we'd get 150, 200 pounds of eels. And I hated those nights, not because I didn't want to catch the eels, but because most of the time I'd be sitting in front of the number 2 tub, having to skin them afterwards and pull them out, and then saving the skins, because we'd sell the skins for a nickel a piece to the fishermen for the lures, and we'd have the meat for the family. But the truth of the matter is that along about the late 70s, a couple of ambitious fishermen, not from our tribe, but ambitious fishermen, decided that they could pot eels with an item that we kind of look at now as kind of like, oh my God, we have to protect that species. But they would throw these pots out there, and eels loved the horseshoe crabs so much that they'd catch the horseshoe crabs, cut them in half, they'd throw them in these pots, and they'd fish 24/7. So they'd come around and pick up their 500 pots. That's how many there were in Wampanoag Bay back then. And those things would be loaded with eels. But there wouldn't be any there the next winter when we went out there to try to stick a few for a few meals. You know, a particular person or a particular group of people made a lot of money, made a fortune on them, and sold them to a number of resources, from the food market to the fishing market to a number of other places. And they profited highly on that, but we all lost. And I can tell you right now that I have a couple of those spears in the back of my car, because they're becoming extinct now. We used to have a couple smiths that would make them for us in Barnstable and up here, but they're not around. They don't make those anymore because nobody uses them. You know, it's nothing to. I used to take my nephews, my family and friends out, and would take an eel spear along in the cold part of the late fall and early winter, and just do a couple sticks to see if we could find a couple sticking around certain areas that we always harvested. And I can tell you that we'd come back empty-handed now. And it realizes that happened in my lifetime. I'm not that old a guy. I got a 7 in front of my name, but it was abundanza when I was a young man, and I can tell you, in one generation, it can go away. It can go away that fast.
I can't remember the last time I've seen a partridge or a quail.
Your father and I used to hunt them right back here. It was loaded because of all those native, well, not native, but those long-standing grapevines back there around the old places, like back when I was a kid, the Adequan Hotel was still there, and there were all kinds of residential homes up in the back that had their own, now abandoned, but arbors, and they loved those.
Yeah.
They'd sit up there and eat those.
Yeah. I missed that call too, the quail. I used to love that call.
Oh.
And I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's a beautiful sound, and I literally cannot remember the last time I've heard it. I haven't seen a quail, and the last time I jumped a partridge had to be good 4 or 5 years ago. It's in my lifetime, and I'm only 54, right? Hate to keep
Yeah, you were a kid.
throwing my name. You know,
You're just a kid.
And speaking of eeling, you used to be able to eel through the ice.
Right.
On the saltwater bays, which is an indication of some of the other issues that we're having, obviously, with global warming. A lot of the eeling that I did with my father was you'd walk out to G-Hughes or one of these salt marshes and go out on the ice, which was thick enough, and you'd feel it moving underneath you, and it was a little scary. Cut your hole and get them right through the ice. I can't remember the last time something's froze up. It's been cold enough for it to freeze up to be safe enough to go out, that's for sure.
not even our ponds. Mashpee Wakeby hasn't frozen over now for about 3 years. We used to drive on it.
So I want to touch on the eels again because that seems to be the main topic here on stuff that food thing. So we still have a problem with the eels coming back. We still have very few because it's like the heron. The heron has been overfished. No one can get the heron but our tribal members. We're still allowed to take heron because we get no impact. But when we went to Boston up there to talk about whether we was going to stop heron or not, I advised them, now you're going to take off the heron, which was a great thing, and that was for the bass fishermen, for the commercial people. The commercial was overfishing the herring, so we're trying to stop that to bounce them back. So now the commercial bass fishermen take eels. They pot eels now, and they want the eel. It's a foot long, the 13, so the juvenile eel. So now we have more juvenile eels getting caught than forever because that's one of their main fishing baits that they use is the eel. And timeless times that I've been down at the canal and gone and threw something in the trash and see a bag in there, and there'd be people leaving and see 1 or 2 eels in the bag thrown away in the garbage, and still alive. This happened to me twice. And so the impact of eels is actually pretty drastic as far as the fishing industry now because the bass fishermen use eels. So when is enough? Just another one main species that's going through hell right now.
Or back in the 90s when you used to go down to South Cape Beach and there'd be a bluefish blitz, but everyone wanted stripers, and there'd be a whole beach full of bluefish, and then the guys would just leave the fish right on the beach. Or if you walked up and said, "I'll take that bluefish," they go, "Nope," and then kick it back in. The thing's floating, and now you can't find. I can't find a bluefish to save my life. I got lucky at one point in the summer, but I got real lucky.
But actions that we can take to protect the environment of the different species, people have their special interests. One of the impacts that I see on our herring, the herring come up into the pond here and spawn, and they lay their eggs in the shallows, and the amount of motorboat activity, I'm sure the agitation of the water is affecting the spawn. And the boating lobby is very powerful. Many people live on the pond because they could have a motorboat. The state monitors the pond. We see the difference between the herring in Mashpee River versus the herring in the Nemasket River. The Nemasket goes into the Assawampset Pond, which is a drinking water source, so there are no boats allowed. And so that fishery is very strong. But the impact of boats on the herring is great. But science doesn't jump on board. And I don't know how much, lobbies, or it's about economics, I guess, economics plays the role here. Money talks and everything else walks, or whatever that line is. And, our interest is the animal, whether it's a water animal or land animal, or, the birds. We saw the eagles being eliminated by DDT here, and the whole rest of the food chain that went with them back in the 50s. And we can advocate for them again, but it requires people to be able to see the whole big picture, not just an aspect that affects their lives, but to see the whole picture.
Thank God for Rachel and Carson.
I know. Well, she's
you know, when you talk about the boats, it isn't just the commercial aspect of that. I remember at our last town meeting, you know, when we were considering should we reduce, you know, how fast the boat should be going on these ponds, just because it's stirring up the bottom and bringing all this horrible gunk up that's killing everything off. And people were saying, but I want to be out there on my boat. You know, you have no right to take this away from me. And it is like, so many people can't see the bigger picture. But truly, I want to say thank you from me. I can't speak for the group, but I thank you for speaking from your hearts to our hearts. And I feel that, you know, I'm very proud to live in the land of the Wampanoag. I hope that you will reach out more and more to our community and ask for our help and our support, because I think you will have a lot of us with you.
Got one more question over here.
Hi. I was just, as I was listening to you about these, you know, the spawning areas and whatever that weren't protected. We live on the north side, and every year on Sandy Neck Beach, areas are cordoned off for the piping plover nests. I don't know if it's because they're endangered or if that's the issue,
Yes.
where you can't get some of these
Yeah.
areas protected.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
That is the issue, but that is a bird that everybody sees. You know what I mean? All these other little animals that they don't see, they don't care about. And this is why it's very important to let everybody know about these other species getting decimated by the overfishing of the oceans. Because that ocean is very important for spawning reasons. If we take everything in the ocean and wants to come and spawn, we're never going to bounce back. We're going to be like all these other countries that come over here to take our fish to bring back to the other countries. Yeah, endangered before they actually want to do something.
I was told we have a few minutes left. I wanted to hopefully touch a little bit on some of the water quality issues that we've been having. And if you live in Mashpee, again, you're quite aware of them. It's a big concern right now. We were talking about horsepower restrictions. I'm assuming you're referencing Santuit, which is a pond that's essentially dead right now. It's got cyanobacteria blooms just about every summer. It's basically closed to fishing. You don't want to go swimming. You don't want your dogs drinking out of it. Mashpee Pond, which is a large lake system, probably for the first time, I think it was about 3 years ago, had a bloom, and now that's been a constant theme as well. Never thought you'd see a water body that large get a bloom, and now here we are. Our bays are a mess. Go down to any bay, not just Mashpee. Go to any bay and look around, and what do you see ringing the entire area? Homes, multi-million-dollar homes. What did you think was going to happen? And our riverways are in rough shape too, because if Santuit Pond is polluted and has 8 feet of toxic metal sediment in it, it's going right down Santuit River, it's going through Shoestring Bay, and it's going right out Papaneset Bay to the ocean. We're having major issues with our water, and it's affecting everything that we can do on the water, recreationally, commercially, traditionally, culturally. So we don't have a lot of time left. I'd like to just hear some comments on that.
Santuit Pond is a very problem. It's very attaching to me, since Santuit Pond was my playground. I lived right down the street next to the Pentecostal church. I grew up there all my life, and that pond was my playground. Every day after school, that's where I ran. I ran to that pond to go catch pumpkin seed, hornpout, fish, snapping turtles, anything that was in that pond that I caught. And I traditionally went to that pond every day of my life as a young kid all the way until my 20s, and when I had my children. We used to go on that pond and camp out when all my kids were small, and then it came polluted, and you could never longer touch that water. I haven't been able to take a fish out of that water in 24 years. It's been that bad. So I'm kind of attached to that pond. Really like to see something done about that. It's really important to go through all of our waterways and do that. You know, what the most important part I always thought I used to feel very attached to is going down there in the summertime and catching sun turtles. My uncle owned the Archery's trading post over there, and we would catch 2 or 3 turtles and run down to the store over here and sit on the store and wait for the tourists to come. And the tourists would come by and ask for directions. And they say, oh, and they look and see the turtle and they say, oh, where did you get the turtle down the street? You want to buy him? And we'd go, yeah, well, we'd start off at $1 and we'd get rid of them for 75 cents. So we'd get 2 or 3 turtles gone and make $2, and a box of yodels would be $1. And a soda would be 25 cents. So we'd get 2 sodas, a box of yodels, and a bag of chips, and we'd be all set. And then the tourists would ask for directions to how to get over the bridge. And we would send them to Hyannis, all the way down to 6A and out to the bridge. And they go, okay, and off they'd go off to 28, and we go, oh, we got them.
I grew up on Mashpee Wakeby Lake and spent most of my life there as a young person until I went off to college and came back, and then built a home over on Santuit Pond, where I lived for a number of years until by my 3rd child, my wife and I realized we needed to find a bigger house. And for the past 35 years, I've lived back on the Wakeby end of Mashpee Wakeby Lake, and very much aware of the lake's change and what's going on there. And there are a number of people that have been involved with that. There are a couple really good associations that have been trying to stay on top of the change that's going on there, and I think it's attributable to a lot of things. Global warming, I think, has definitely impacted us. The overuse of that lake, and I can tell you from having sat over in that school in what used to be the cafeteria for the public hearings when the town was trying to restrict the kind of impact that was being imposed on it for the landing and stuff like that, and then realizing the political impact of having a half a dozen fishing organizations show up and fill a room full of very loud resource users. It soon became apparent that any lake as big as Mashpee Wakeby, Wequacket down Cape or anything like that, is considered a public resource, and the use of it goes well beyond our local community. And it's just an ongoing fight. We have to bring them, the users of that, back to reason as to what will and won't allow us to keep and preserve the nature of that body of water. The other thing that bothers me are the invasive species. If you stop at the Mashpee River down here on Route 130 on your way home, you'll see a bunch of small shells of invasive species that have been brought in by fishing boats and other resources. Fortunately for us right now, they haven't adapted so they live through the summer, so we're not seeing as big a proliferation as some other places have, but they're there and they increase in numbers, and so have other bacteria, the cyanobacteria. They've had to close Mashpee Wakeby the last 3 years. It's cost me over $1,000 when that cyanobacteria blooms, because I have to take my cat that was at one time a stray cat that I happened to take in. Now it costs me $1,000 to take her up there to get her examined and given the antibacterial medication that will allow her to overcome that impact. I used to have a 22-foot boat out there with a 225-foot engine, and I took it out of the water 10 years ago, and it sat up there underneath a piece of plastic fence. And I used to have a beautiful twin craft boat that we taught the kids to ski and stuff on. I took that out of the water because I agree that it's having a negative impact on what's going on there. It's hard for that pond to get clear again. most ponds will turn over naturally. There's a natural turnover in the change in temperatures and stuff. But I can tell you that I've been taking, for years I've been taking videos of the Mashpee River, and this time of the year we would see it flooded with baby herring going back down to sea this time of the year, right up into December. I've got videos in my camera right now of schools of sardines going back out to sea. That's not happening right now. And that's even with people making the changes they do. This morning I woke up, there were about 15 boats that I could see from my front step out there fishing. So, you know, I'm not saying we have to stop all the recreational activity, but we certainly need to start bringing all of those resources that use the lake together to understand that it's in all of our interests to do whatever we can to preserve the quality of that water. You know, it flows to the same stuff that we drink.
Are we?
Yeah, Chief, you know a lot of
She asked about invasive species, and Alan alluded to there's certain aquatic invasive species, but on the dryland side there are numerous invasive species, and many of these, well, some came in colonial times and they had a certain invasive nature, but in our lifetime we've seen an explosion in invasives, and just the whole nature of the environment has changed. We have paths here in Mashpee that have been walked on. They've been in continual use for thousands of years, and in the last 50 years they're no longer passable because of invasive species. The invasive species displace the native vegetation, and that has an impact on such diverse animals as bees, birds, well, we mentioned rabbits, many other four-legged, that their food ways have been the same for thousands of years, but now suddenly these other species have come in, and it takes a long time for the wildlife to adapt to a different food. Just like we were kind of alluding to earlier about diet, you are what you eat, and there are many of these invasives now that the wildlife doesn't forage on, so their growth is uncontrolled. And secondarily, they displace the natural environment. So there's things that we naturally gather. I mean, I'm kind of selfish in that way that, you know, I like what I like, and there are things that that we consume in our families that you can't get anymore because the invasives have replaced them in the environment. They outcompete because they perhaps start growing sooner, or just their nature of growth is that they can grow so fast, so quickly that they displace the native plants. The state does have programs, and they encourage people to, when they can, to say dig up. You may have heard of purple loosestrife. It's a flowering plant, very pretty, makes nice cut flowers, but it has a way of overtaking all of an environment, so it becomes monoculture in a way. Monoculture is when you're growing one plant over a vast area. Cranberries, for example, when they cut out large portions of our river bottom land and made it cranberries, it displaced thousands of different other plants that would have been growing in those environments because of economics. Then they were abandoned, and still now they're covered, many of them, with invasives. If you go down Mashpee River, down the lower portion of the river, where there were formerly bogs, it's all now just a dense undergrowth of invasive species. And so still they create these microenvironments that preclude the native wildlife from taking it back over. And I mean, in the places where we used to gather things, specifically medicinal plants and all, that used to be prime territory, but those native plants can only just barely struggle to still be present as part of that ecosystem because of the invasives. And it's a problem that we're learning. We're still not clear on how to get a grasp on that problem, but that is too something that involves everybody to be involved in.
We're seeing some good movement. Barnstable, for example, recently took over a bunch of the bogs that were in the eastern end of Santuit Pond in that area around Newtown Road, and they were actually restoring those to native plant areas. I mean, so there are efforts that are being made. I mean, a lot of people recognize the need. A lot of people are on board with doing these kinds of fixes. They take resources. They take money. And we have a number of people now that are bequeathing land that they have, and they've had for years, to the land trusts to deal with maintaining certain species and environments. So there are ways to address them. Turning back time is hard, though. And it's something that we may or may not be around to see the result of, but have to hold ourselves accountable if we're not trying.
David Greendeer, Buddy Pocknick, Chief Earl Mills, Alan Maxim, Jason Steiding, thank you so much. The information was wonderful. We really appreciate your time today. I'm sorry, I said Greendeer. David Green, I'm so sorry. That's why you're like I'm sorry. I also want to say, I've been calling your the Natural Resources Committee, but it's commission, I understand. I apologize for that. I've been calling it the committee. It's the commission. I also would like to say, so we at Link sponsored this event today, or put this on today. We are a group of people who are trying to bring forward the true history and culture of the Wampanoags. So we have a website. If you want to visit our website, it's linkcapecod.org. Lots of information there, resources of what you might find to read or things going on the Cape. Also, we have a table. We have several pamphlets and information about what these gentlemen have been talking about today for your taking. And I don't know if there's anything else I should be adding here today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful that you were willing to do this today. We'll do something like it again.